Bandwidth for changelog is provided by Fastly. Learn more at fastly.com.
I'm JBD, and it's go time.
It's Go Time, a weekly podcast where we discuss interesting topics around the Go programming language, the community, and everything in between. If you currently write Go or aspire to, this is the show for you. It's episode number 22 of Go Time. Today's episode is sponsored by Linode and Code School. And today on the show, we have myself, Eric St. Martin. We have Carlicia Campos. Say hello, Carlicia.
Hi, everybody.
And she's still laughing from everything that happened before show. I can hear it.
I'm trying to hold it back.
And Brian Kettleson was not able to make it, but today standing in for him, we have Corey Lanou. Say hello, Corey.
Hey, everybody.
And our special guest today is a core contributor to Go and familiar to probably just about everybody. And I'll go ahead and let her give her own introduction. JBD.
Hello. So I work on Go. I actually have been contributing to the project for the past years, and just started to contribute as a part of my full-time job again. My role in the team is pretty unique. So I wouldn't say that like I am, contributing code to the project at this point. So the team wants me to be a user, a Power Go user. So looking things from the perspective of the user. Keep writing, code against Go rather than contributing more code to Go. I'm kind of like a, typical gopher, but live in maybe one release cycle in the future and exposed to tip, development going on the tip and what is coming up next. My responsibility is particularly giving feedback about usability API design, where, things require more thinking from the user's perspective. I recently started to do this job and I was late for 1.8, but will be more involved in the future releases. And, it also depends on how many user-facing critical changes are coming in. So, yeah, that's what I do.
So what types of applications are you developing? Because it seems like you do a lot of stuff in hardware and kind of audio and mobile. Mm-hmm. So is this kind of tackling each of these areas and just trying to build applications and see what you run up against?
Mm-hmm. I was originally working on for Google Cloud and somehow bootstrapped all the cloud libraries, some sort of like good API design and idiomatic libraries and everything around, cloud products and how we can actually like interact with the ecosystem so much better. And I kind of like moved to another role to work on the mobile project where, the scope of the mobile project was more like first making the runtime running both on iOS and Android, and then, come up with some libraries that will work on those two platforms and providing some tooling similar to GoTool that will allow you to build mobile applications rather than just a binary. And I was involved in that. As a continuation of that work, last year I was working on Android team with Android team, and Android is going through some sort of reorganization when it comes to they're building some tools and some more structure to build custom Android kernels, and the team also wanted to expose GPIO and other peripheral communication interfaces from Android, and wanted Android to work on popular Linux development boards. So I was involved in there and just like trying to figure out how we can make Go as a first-class citizen for Android, for more like targeting on their embedded markets and what they're envisioning for the future.
So this is sort of like people who are using kind of like Odroid boards and BeagleBoard Blacks and things like that you can kind of get Android on.
Yeah, this is just Linux boards, and Android team has been, I think like this has been such a historically much requested feature to be able to extend Android with board specific, hardware abstraction. Like what is historically requested was a more extendable hardware abstraction layer, so you can contribute more, board specific things and extend the capabilities and deploy Android to other billions of Linux boards around. So Android team is trying to meet that goal by making it more configurable, so any manufacturer can take Android and make it working on their Linux board.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, Brian's been playing a little bit with writing Go on a Raspberry Pi for his smoker.
Oh, nice. Yeah. That's awesome.
It's just too much fun. Smoking dinner with Go. I just love creativity with that, and we've seen a bunch of that stuff too. You're constantly showing stuff off on Twitter that you're.
Oh yeah, there are billions of projects. I have billions of projects. I personally like physical buttons a lot, so I just like realized that my entire world is surrounded by software and touch screens and things. That's why I was just replacing things with hardwired, physical buttons where I feel more comfortable with, and there was tons of things to do. And due to the relationship with Brillo project, the Android project is called Brillo project, by the way. Android focusing on the embedded aspects is called Brillo. We were ordering so many stuff from China every month. We had this huge, repository of devices around and sensors and all sorts of displays and things. It was really fun times.
So it occurred to me one day because I was looking at the piles of stuff I have here, because I have a similar thing. Like when I'm tinkering with electronics, why am I going to, buy one chip from Adafruit or SparkFun or something when I can just buy 100 of them for a similar price from China?
Yeah.
And then all this stuff acquires and it's sitting there, it's in drawers. And it occurred to me one day when I saw something you were posting, it's I wonder what your stash looks like.
We created a couple of, I think, the best, combination of things. Because I think, once you're working on, I was working on a developer-facing product, and we were also trying to come up with a set we can, propose as the de facto combination of those, little devices, so the users can run the tutorials with them. And we've been thinking too much about them, thinking about designing custom things, and it's been so much fun.
So Corey and Carlisa, do either of you have experience kind of tinkering with the hardware side of things or embedded?
I did the Go for Gala last year. Nathan had a project, and I joined to help him a little bit with also somebody else here from San Diego, Ravi. And so I got to play with the Raspberry Pi, and we put in code that actually made the Raspberry Pi use a motion sensor, and that was very cool. I sort of have an irrational aversion to hardware, because my impression is that hardware always they don't work when I touch them. I don't know, it's completely irrational. So I try to stay away from hardware in general, although
you give
it
off
looks
a
pretty
static
cool.
charge that just messes up all electronics.
Yes, but it's that it's supposed to have a button, and I don't find the button, and it's ridiculous things. But at any rate, I thought the Raspberry Pi is small and I could handle it, so I really fell in love with it, but I didn't play much with it after that.
One of the things that I think I loved the most was learning how simple serial protocols are, and then then what you do is you buy yourself a logic analyzer, and then you start finding random pieces of electronics and trying to find the chips and what their serial ports are, and then start peeking in on what it's doing.
Are you doing any serious debugging that way, or is it just how you investigate what is going on, or?
It's more from just a reverse engineering standpoint. How does this work? And I've tried a couple of times to send my own commands and stuff on regular boards, and that's usually where it gets not so simple, because ordering comes into play. Reverse engineering any sort of protocol is hard, because you got to kind of understand.
Yeah. But a logic analyzer is the printf of, I think, working with these protocols. And people were so surprised that I have scopes and like, all these logic analyzers around, but like, it's just like the mandatory requirement. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's let's say if you start with something like a Raspberry Pi or Arduino, and you can look at that and you might be able to debug from a website and things like that, the commands that you're sending, but ultimately you end up like on GPIO pins and communicating with other hardware, and then at that point you're cut off. And it's really painful to like try to get it to blink a light like a number of times when it hits somewhere and debug that way. So typically you want to kind of just probe in with a logic analyzer and look at the communication.
Yeah. And, sort of like trying to understand what is going on with the, kernel driver. I've been exposed to a couple of bugs. It was impossible to like get anything done without actually looking at the final output of the signal.
I think it's fun for people to learn at the hardware level too. Like I love having oscilloscopes and, plugging it onto, an audio wire and looking at what audio actually looks like.
Yeah, when I was a child, my father introduced us into signal processing by just like looking at oscilloscope, output. And I gathered so much information from there by just like, we had I think like I remember we had a very small set of like, we were just like producing some sine wave or like, sawtooth and looking at it and changing the frequency. And it just like gave me so much. And then he also introduced us like bitwise modulations and things like that. And like visualization is just perfect. Like, I mean, I think as a part of our education, we should also like encourage more of this way of thinking by looking at what is going on and reverse engineering it.
Yeah, I was teaching my son a while back using an oscilloscope. We made almost like a theremin, just a 555 timer and a light sensor.
Yeah.
And he had a blast with it until we got annoyed with the high-pitched sound that it made. I didn't quite think that went through, that he would love this thing and want to play with it. And like, so is hardware kind of your true passion and kind of where it meets software, or is this just kind of like something you do to break away from the software side? Or?
Yeah, that's more of like the latter. I just, have a full-time job, which is already boring. And sometimes I think my entire projects have grown with the necessity of me having to design or like, prototype hardware for my musical, experimentation. And I still do some sort of, trying to work on, trying to build instruments rather than, working on other, like, I don't know how to say this, but like my entire music is very experimental and also involves hardware I invent as well as software. So it's more like a, side project, like a weekend project where I kind of like escape from my daily routine.
Yeah, I think that typically is what I do too. Mine sits for months on end sometimes. I think I like thinking about that I might one day have the time to work on some secret project I have in my head.
Yeah.
And then I create new ones without ever finishing the one prior. It's like, oh, I want to help with building the barbecue controller, the pit controller, and then we're playing with RC cars the one day, and it's like, oh, I'm totally building a traction control system for my RC car. And
I think that's the beauty of all this like maker, thinking. It's just I think we are always in this constantly, work in progress projects, but like we invent by looking at what is going on, what is in common. And I think we're doing this for the joy rather than trying to achieve anything. So I think that's fair.
I want to go back a little bit, and I didn't jump in right away because I was looking for the link. Eric once mentioned a course, I guess it's what it is, called NAND to Tetris. And I'm super looking forward to doing it. I think I'm going to be able to do it next year. It's basically a course that takes you from the very basics and step by step all the way up to building a modern computer. And the good news for me is that it's all simulation. I don't have to deal with hardware.
Nice.
I personally don't have anything against hardware, like I was saying, is that they just don't work with me. So I don't know, I have this impression. But in any case, it's all simulation. You don't have to. And it gets expensive too, I think, buying these one-off things. But so this is really cool. And I think, and I'm saying this because I also think it's very important for us to learn a little bit more about what it is that's below of what we are doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I totally agree with in order to contribute to the first argument, saying that I think simulation is really important. For Brillo, my coworkers were more passionate about building a graphical interface where just kind of give people how to what it feels to work with GPIO rather than work in anything else. The number one reason is making hardware working and making sure it's working correctly. Getting it to a state where everything is working is just really hard. So you just want to have a feel, how it feels, what the APIs look, how easy it is, without touching any of that stuff. So I think it's just really valuable to have simulation going on.
Yeah.
I think that there's cheap ways people can do electronics too. And I want to say it's the Make Electronics book. It's like Learning Through Discovery or something like that. And like the number of components that you need is pretty small. And I think it's nice to have that hands-on and for people to kind of learn like what happens, and what a burnt capacitor smells like. And it's something interesting about doing that. But the NAND to Tetris book that Carlicia was talking about, I love that book. The one thing I don't like is the chapters go really fast. So you kind of need supplemental learning material, but it starts at kind of like gates and Boolean logic and how to build a NAND gate and then how those are kind of assembled, and then you can basically build the ALU of a computer using nothing but NAND gates. And then it kind of builds up there where you kind of have your own assembly language and then your own assembler and then kind of like an object-oriented language and then a virtual machine. And each stage is kind of the thing that I love about the book is each stage is kind of on its own. And they have like a way of unit testing your stuff. So when you're trying to build your assembly language, it has inputs, expected inputs and outputs, so it can validate it. And so it's a really cool experience for people who are interested in learning kind of from the hardware level up into, the code that we write every day.
And they have a course on Coursera too.
Oh, do they have it on Coursera now?
Yeah, so they have the book and they have a course on Coursera.
Yeah, Brian. So Brian isn't on the show because of choppy internet connection where he's out in London, but he's heckling us from Slack, and he just reminded me of the person who built the ALU in Minecraft using the same book as his approach, which was really interesting. It would like you set the binary number with torches, and then it goes through like all these little things, and the cows move, and this happens, and then you go to the other side, you can read the output. I'll find a link to the video where somebody is like messing with it, but it's hilarious, and you wonder like who sits here and thinks of that? Like, oh, I just did this NAND to Tetris thing. You know what I should build an ALU with? Minecraft.
Very cool. I kind of feel like we were the last generation who has like some sort of privilege to understand everything from like end to end, because when I was a child, the personal computers were so small, and you can open like I remember having Spectrum. I was a Spectrum user, and its manual was basically starting with basic programming language, and the next chapter was the computer architecture, kind of like gives you all the main components and how they work and how they interact with each other. And the final chapter was like instruction set and like how can you write optimizations and things. And by looking at like the current complexity of the things, I think our current generation doesn't have the same privilege to learn, understand everything from end to end. What Raspberry Pi was trying to do was trying to make things more accessible. I think I think all the Linux boards are doing a better job now, but everything is just too complex at this point. It's just so many layers, and it's so easy to get lost. When I introduce myself that I'm supposed to be a PowerGo user and giving people, the team, usability API design feedback, maybe initiating libraries and tooling to fill the gaps. If there's experimentation is required, probably I need to run, experiment. I have more time to run experimentation, so it's part of my responsibility. And I'm still in this transitioning period, and while I'm there, I'm just trying to listen the community, gather some feedback, actual, actionable items. One of the things that Brian was mentioning is this feedback around tooling. I want to understand rather than specific bugs or complaints. What are the biggest picture problems? If we would like to rethink about tooling, what we should fix and how we should fix. This involves understanding of the current workflow of the users and what is missing there, and trying to understand more of a bigger picture rather than focusing on little things. And I'm kind of surprised by the number of people who actually returned back to me and wrote about how they feel about certain things, or like really big, things that maybe needs to be redesigned or can be, supported by experimental tools or extension tools. So I'm really excited to hear more. And I do believe as a community or as a language, we will never succeed if we cannot, create this type of feedback channel and question what we're doing once a while.
I'm wondering if you are using any guideline, or if you're trying to go in a specific direction to avoid having the vocal minority speak for the issues that are not the priority for maybe the majority of the people. Or maybe you're looking into having usability as the guide for what you are doing, or any other guideline that you are using to make sure that you are achieving your goal no matter who's responding to your requests.
I think absolutely. The goal of this project is not trying to understand what are the established users are trying to do. So let me give you how I see a little bit like, inside of how I see things, because I think there are too many reasons why people learn a language or just get involved in a language. The first one is personal development or interest. I think, this is what mainly made the initial Go community. So these type of people have more tolerance, and they're more passionate about the challenges for the sake of learning. The other thing is the other type of people comes there just because it's a requirement. It's enforced by your employer, school, whatever. And I think our goal, our community was dominated by the first group that we couldn't really question too much about how do we treat the newcomers. What is missing, or like from a totally person that is out, not coming from the same background that our community is coming from, what is missing. I think our language and tooling is just so totally built on conventions, historical conventions, but are we doing anything to communicate them? Are people getting lost just because they cannot make the connections? I really like Katrina's talk at GopherCon this year, because she was really pretty clear about this. When I looked at the spec, I understood everything, but I was not able to make the connections, and was not able to light up all the different topics around the sentence I was reading. I think it's generally true for everything, not for the language spec. When it comes to APIs, when it comes to what we consider good readability or tooling, I think we are coming from a typical background, and everything is so much clear to us, but not true for the vast majority in the tech.
And have you been able to at least have some insights about things that can be done to make that better?
I think my audience is a little bit restricted. I cannot really go to people who are coming from totally different backgrounds, and I cannot enforce them to use Go and give them feedback. The only way I see, which might be valuable, but it's still not ideal because it's a small subset of the same culture on itself. I think, new graduates or people who are at Google who really believes that this language is not really, productive or fitting their worldview might be a good place to seek for that type of feedback. That's the only practical, easy, and actionable thing I can work on. And I'm considering it. I think the main goal of rethinking about these problems is to make newcomers happy rather than working for the existing users, because existing users already know what they need to do.
So when you talk about newcomers, I'm curious if you're primarily targeting like the traditional newcomers that are just coming off of projects that Go is going to just work better for, or are you actually really targeting people coming from the different fields of technology that Go is not already being used in?
I'm particularly targeting people who are, either have experience or inexperience in another language, and just trying to use Go as a replacement.
So it sounds to me that one challenge that you have is to help people see the benefits of Go without going through too much hassle. Because people can read a blog post and say, oh, Go is very productive and Go is very fast and other positives, but they still have to commit to trying it out. And maybe making that gap shorter from the moment they get exposed to the idea of using Go to the moment that they actually do something with Go and see the results. I guess where your challenge is in making that gap as short as possible.
Yeah, this kind of also relates to the first initial idea I had, how I see people. I still see people who already believes that this language could be valuable for themselves, and trying to invest time in this language has a little bit more tolerance. But yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I mean, I don't have a really clear answer to how we should gather feedback from people we don't know and people who are not necessarily talking to us. Maybe what we need to do is more of typical user studies where we just put people who absolutely have no background in our material and see how well they're going and how they feel as a feedback.
Do you think it's the language features that is the time that we have to spend the investment on for newcomers? And I say that because when I came to Go, everything was easy. And I mean that from a standpoint of using other languages. There was a lot of work. There was a big environment to set up. You had to have everything just right. You had to have a special editor. And then once you got it going, the language syntax was very difficult. And all those things in Go are really easy. And so I'm curious, and it sounds funny, right? It's like we're trying to optimize for these newcomers and get them to onboard faster. And I think that's great. But I also feel like it's phenomenal compared to most other languages already. So I'm curious, what aspects do you think that can be improved the most?
I'd like to kind of jump in here too, because there's one area that I think can improve. And when we look at the walkthrough online, the Go tutorial, it goes through a lot of the language features, but some of the stuff is not necessarily approachable just in domain knowledge. Like one instance I know of somebody who was going through the tutorial and got hung up on one of the things, and I think it was just working with slices or arrays or something like that. But the object of that particular chapter was to build bitmaps or something like that. And it was really confusing just understanding what the domain model was. And then a lot of people are used to learning in kind of these bite-sized chunks. And one of our sponsors, actually, Code School, in the Ruby world, they had the Rails for Zombies thing, right? Where and people could connect with that. They're building this little game and it deals with zombies and things like that. And it makes things a lot more approachable because understanding the domain isn't there anymore. It's not understanding what do you mean by build a bitmap, and it's just kind of dealing with kind of the task at hand, like working with slices. So, and actually on that note, before we kind of continue back into this, I guess that's kind of like a perfect transition because one of our sponsors is actually Code School. And they've just launched a new electives course for anyone wanting to get started in Go. The course is led by Carlos Souza and has 5 levels. Level 1's completely free. All you have to do is head over to codeschool.com/go click on the giant Start Course for Free button and create a free account to get started. Level 1 has 2 videos and 8 challenges. And the cool thing is that all of the coding will be done completely from your browser. You don't have to hassle with installing Go, messing with your Go path, any of these things. You can just sign up for your account and get started. After you've made it through the first level, they have 4 more levels that have around 30 or so, 35 challenges that'll work your way through variables and type inference. You can learn about all the data types and error handling, collections. And then by the time you make it down into the level 4 and 5, you get into some of the unique factors that bring many people to Go, working with values and pointers, receivers, interfaces and composition, how to structure packages, writing concurrent code, which is the primary reason a lot of people are coming to Go. Make sure you head over to codeschool.com/Go, try out the first level. Thanks again to Code School for this awesome course and for sponsoring the show. So just before the break, Corey was asking you, JBD, what areas you think can be improved to optimize for newcomers?
I do not believe that we have a easy onboarding experience. When I started using this programming language, I learned so many things through code reviews and asking people that, one of the obvious example is we still don't have canonical tutorials for the tooling. And it just took me experience to get there and feel productive. And, at a certain point where I feel like, oh yeah, I understand this language and its tools and everything. I think initially the community was more of exchanging ideas and knowledge, and it was easy. There was I think, lower barrier to contribute to one of the contributors' code base and, get your Go code reviewed. And information was so much easier to access. I don't believe that it's true anymore. What do you feel about that?
I guess I think that makes sense. I think maybe part of my comment there might be because I've been doing Go so long, it feels pretty natural. But I guess I do remember when I came online, the tool chain I definitely struggle with, and I think that's what you're commenting about. The language, not so much, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I guess I do remember struggling a little bit, like, how do I get my tester on? How do I get this to build? How do I install this thing? And that, I think, was a lot of searching on Google for me to find that originally. So I can definitely understand that.
Yeah, and I kind of feel the same even for the our error messages from the tool chain. There are so many cryptic things. Once you learn what the message means, you are productive in understanding the case. But it just requires you always to Google things, and I think that's the goal of my project and how I see things. How I prioritize these improvement projects.
One of the things that I found very helpful in the current tool chain is a little tool that Ben Johnson wrote. It's called Goo, Goo. And instead of running Go test, I run Goo test all the time, because what it does is it detects the very first error in the stack output every time and copies it to my buffer, and it highlights it. So it's nice, when you do a Go test and here's your 15 errors, you really care about the first one, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's all you care about. Something that simple is actually incredibly helpful.
Yeah. The project, the feedback I'm gathering is tons of like small improvements like this. It's just there are so many things that actually will make us to reconsider things, but there are tons of things to just improve by just like changing the order, making something more highlighted, and small things like that.
In thinking about improving things just by changing orders, I think it would be great if we had a website that was easy to use and contained a path from beginning to the end, from newcomer to beginner programmer, newcomer experienced programmer, newcomer to Go, to very advanced software development. And even if it's not that it's supposed to contain everything, but it's one path, and then people can veer from that path as they need, but at least they have one path. For example, I run into this website called go.java. Has nothing to do with Go. It's just called Go Java. And it has that. It has 4 menus at the top. It's learn Java skills, create and contribute, develop software, obviously for more experienced developers, and lead your organization. Like, if you are an organization, what do you need? great. Those are the paths. And those 4 things, I think, will lead anybody from where they are to the next step. And what we have now is this past year, I've seen the level of resources increasing dramatically, but it still is hard to find it. You have to be sort of keeping tabs or searching, and you're not sure, like, is this the best one that I should be looking at for me? Yeah. So we don't have that entry point anywhere. I mean, we do have the blogs, of course, we have the documentation, but I think we can improve immensely on that front.
We've been thinking what Rust has done. They have a book, and it's just like more of canonical guidelines to do anything. It's not just like, explaining the language, but the entire ecosystem. You have a binary, but like, maybe we can include best practices for production and things like that. I do think that the blog was sort of like being used to publish white papers, but like it's not quite organized, and it doesn't give you some sort of navigation. I do really believe that we need some sort of another medium to write guidelines, more canonical guidelines, which may also contain what you've been talking, or the thing that I was mentioning with the tool chain, where there's no canonical way to see what I can do with this project, with this aspect. So I agree, and I think there are multiple people agreeing on that, and there are some sort of people already working on it.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think that tends to be the struggle, right? I think there's a lot of resources for teaching the semantics of the language, but then people look at it and are like, okay, well, how do I get from A to B?
Yeah.
I understand these different constructs of the language, but I want to build a web service. Where do I start? What does a typical structure of an application look like? Am I doing it right? And I think people give up there, which is interesting.
We have more than, like, we are thinking more than just production, or like building some of the best practices about building systems. I think the next year or two will be more about trying to understand how we can communicate best practices once you have a Go binary. You have a Go binary. What is next? What are our best practices for production? Or, what we can teach people to, think, how to think, build in large systems, or, what we can do for diagnostics, instrumentation, profiling, tracing, and debugging. And some of these, items require actually some community-wide solutions. So the next 1 or 2 year will be more like investigating what to do now. And, the entire, I think, ecosystem should be more focused on playing with the binary rather than achieving the binary.
That's interesting. So I guess it's probably just part of the growth of a language, right? I mean, we're still very, very early on. So kind of those types of things are kind of maybe the natural progression in a language. I mean, how would you contrast that to other languages?
I would say that it's the typical, the only language I was involved with, I think, from the very beginning to end was Java. I think it's just natural that you expect people to focus on readability, idioms, learning the language and mastering it. And then like taking it to the next level is actually about building really, good production stuff with it, and supporting the production teams. And I do believe it's natural in every language that the focus will be shifted more to the other aspects, because there will be more knowledge and on the idioms in the language. So I think it's very natural that we are shifting that towards that way.
And now you said you had your other points you kind of really wanted to discuss for the kind of the wider community to be in on, right?
Yeah, I want to say, I think in order to understanding what we are going to be working on in the next 2 years, I think is just the biggest challenge we have, because the scale is really big, and there are too few people on this project working full time. and the community is getting growing. But I do believe that like our communication is pretty broken, and the main reason let's put it this way. I think like all the the random topics we talked about is always just being talked in random conversations. We need more structure probably and better communication to achieve anything that will expand our impact region. I would say that like what I really see missing in our community is there is no point of talking about transmission feedback. I do say that like I mean in the beginning we had more central points, and our community is getting really big, so it's really healthy that we have distributed communities. But I think like as we are getting more distributed, it's so much harder to gather feedback, and only a very small portion of the community is actually contributing to the development of the language. I think this is pretty expected, but I see really obvious cases where people are complaining on Twitter, but then I see that there's no issue filed, and I'm just trying to understand what is the missing thing that makes that person, not feeling encouraged to, file it as an issue.
That's interesting. So have you seen the way the Kubernetes process is developed? So this is actually going to be what I mentioned in the Free Software Friday section, but I think it kind of fits in here. So they run special interest groups. So there's kind of like split up.
That was basically what I was trying to achieve. Like I was about to explain. I do believe the only way to get there is just creating focus groups and like work groups probably. And we pretty much like have an understanding of which areas we should invest. And there are already, so many people from the community who are working on their, small projects, personal projects, or their company sponsored projects. But there's no discussion around those topics in a collective and systematic way.
So there seems to be a recognition from you. Is this recognition shared by the other Go team members? And do you find that there is resistance, or you trying to figure out, is everybody trying to figure out if this really applies, or are you already moving in the direction of trying to find solutions for that?
So in the Go team, there is a subgroup for cloud-related projects we have at Google and beyond. And this team is, mainly responsible for, just making sure that everybody's on the everybody's committing to good APIs and trying to understand how they can support the community. And for example, this particular sub-team was pretty supportive of the work groups because, their work and as I said, that like the biggest challenge is the scale is so big and they would like their work to be impactful. And listening the community and trying to react according to the necessity of the community requirements is the top priority, I think, for the Go team. And this work group, we're trying to establish this work group and see if it's going to work, because if our communication is not efficient, or people are not participating, or if we are not really making the communication accessible, this model is not going to work either. So we would like to try with at least one work group to see how it goes. And from that point on, there's been other people who suggested other work groups, other responsibilities, and I think this will naturally happen because without this structure or some sort of like giving ownership or collecting more collective feedback from the users or the contributors, it's just impossible to scale the language.
Yeah, I think the micro groups is definitely a way to go there. I think some of it is when you're on a macro level and it's like we just expect the entire world to weigh their opinion in. It's hard. It's not approachable.
Yeah.
And for me personally, the Go community is fantastic, and I find like people that are in the Go community, I find them to be really approachable, right?
Yeah.
And now this is just my perception, but I've never felt like the Go team has been approachable. And I'm not saying that's their fault. I just feel like there's no conduit that I have that's, hey, I want to express my opinion other than if I tweet something out and, hopefully I don't get any backlash from that. So the approachability there, I think, might be part of the problem as well.
I think the main problem is we don't have a channel to brainstorm ideas. Currently, you have the issue tracker, and you have the proposal process, which you definitely need to come up with something really mature and working in order to propose and got it reviewed. There's nothing in between. It's so hard to, I think, understand or just like work on existing random ideas or like brainstorm about what could be done, just because the lack of that, like that lightweight, I think. I don't know. I do believe that like it's the lack of medium rather than people are not trying to listen, because ranting on Twitter or there is some, like, I think each team member have some capacity, and we need to provide data to them in a more aggregate way so they can consume and effectively solve.
Well, I think also just letting the community know that you're looking for direction and you're looking for input too, that'll be a big deal. I think most of us just kind of go along our merry way and we figure, hey, this is Google and they've got this under control and they know where they're headed, right?
Well, that's not true. I mean, Google actually hired me to work on this project to give feedback to the team. I do really believe that Google also doesn't really, well, people think that Google has a really big control on this language. Google didn't really care about this language for a very long time. It's just becoming more popular very recently, but I think the perception is wrong. It's more about having no channel, and without having a good channel, it's just impossible to, have a healthy communication. And it may sound more, isolating or ignoring the actual facts just because you don't have an efficient way to gather this feedback and, execute on that.
Right. And I think my point is, again, I'm in no way trying to insult Google or Go or the team. Like, I want to be really clear, right? I think it's the fact that, I'm pretty involved in the community. And so if I've got that perception that, I don't think I'm probably alone there, right? So I think it's one of those things where it's really good that you're talking about this and really letting people know, like, no, like we want to go this direction and we're looking for this participation.
Yeah. I agree. I think this is not really communicated well, but I don't really believe that anybody is against of this.
Now, the people that will form these committees, can they come from outside of Google?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't really believe that like having more Googlers on this project is going to help, because it really shaped around, Google, and it's, I think, kind of like blocking itself or, blocking its reach because it's so, totally dependent on the Google culture. I think everything should be outside of Google, ideally.
And for the Google Cloud Platform working group, at least that's what I understand, it's already in motion.
That's not the Google Cloud. We don't care about a specific provider.
I'm sorry, what working group did you say you were going to start with?
We were thinking about a cloud work group more than, any provider. We were just trying to understand more of like production related story and beyond, and, support APIs or what we can contribute to the community to make it easier for all this, we're trying to achieve things that are provider agnostic.
And do you have already any guideline for people to raise their hand and say, I want to participate in this working group? And so do you have like a criteria for selection for people to join in?
So this is still a proposal internally, and I'm working on to finalize it. I wrote the proposal myself. And the initial idea was to initiate some sort of feedback from different people and understand the requirement for a work group. And if people agrees, I think what we do is just continue. I don't have specific people in mind, But as long as I announce this thing, I think I will just try to gather feedback from people. And I think that naturally people who are given feedback will be a part of the work group in the future.
And it's published too. So for like the Kubernetes groups, the way they operate, the special interest groups, is there's a published list of them. And if you're interested in the way networking works or scheduling, you have all the contact details there, who the primaries are. They have weekly meetings where they do demos and stuff, and you can comment on that stuff. So I think there's a lot of that stuff that I think that could be played with to get everybody kind of interested in specific areas, collaborating better. Because like you said, you're just throwing it out into the sea when you're complaining on Twitter, and you hope that somebody who has the means to solve that problem for you sees it.
I think we can also solve this, like the core team doesn't have bandwidth to think about these issues, by just sharing the responsibility with other groups. And naturally, just because there will be a group that is assigned to think about these problems, I do believe that like the feedback loop will be more efficient.
And I think another thing that you wanted to talk about was kind of like why languages succeed and fail. But before we do that, let's talk about our next sponsor, Linode. If you head over to linode.com/GoTime, you can get your very own Linode up and running in seconds. Choose your flavor of Linux, the amount of resources you need, and choose from any of their 8 data centers spread across the world. You get full root access. You can run VMs in containers. If you haven't had a chance to play with Kubernetes, now is a great time to go there and spin up a couple of Linodes. 3 nodes would cost you $30 a month. Even if you wanted to play with it for the weekend, they've got hourly billing. They also have a great CLI app so that you don't even need to log into their website if you want to deploy or tear down some of your Linodes, and a great HTTP API. Even though there's not a Go SDK now, but we'd love to invite you to create one and open source it. And if you do, please come talk to us. We'd love to hear from you. If you head over to linode.com/GoTime, you can use the code GoTime20 to get 2 months free, which is a $20 credit with unlimited uses. Make sure to tell your friends and head over to linode.com/GoTime. So you were talking about language succeeding and failure, mostly due to communication?
Well, before getting there, I've seen something on the Slack channel says like, Aaron is saying, working code speaks louder than work groups to start serious conversation. I partially agree with this, but partially disagree. And I think experimentation or community-driven projects has a really small scope. You cannot achieve community-wide, APIs by starting, experimental projects or like, personal projects, because you're just like by design excluding so many aspects, because you're restricting yourself to your own goals. And I think the idea behind work groups is to see what else is there. Otherwise, it's just easy to execute working code and solve a small aspect. But I don't really believe that the main goal behind working groups is solving specific problems in its own small scope.
One thing to keep in mind when you bring up these concerns is that you are looking at it from the perspective of scaling the use of Go. We are relatively new, maybe not so new anymore. I don't even know if we should be saying we're so new. And we are trending upwards in terms of adoption. Mm-hmm. And you are concerned that we don't have such a great communication. We don't have such great channels for feedback. Feedbacks are being given out there without it being incorporated into the people who are working with the language in documentation and everything that goes with it. And you are thinking, well, if it's this way now, how is it going to be when the community is double? A lot of people think this community is going to grow a lot. So I think you're right to be thinking this way. And it's,
yeah.
I from what you said, I think having working groups or special interest groups is a great idea. It will not hurt to have feedback. And I think it can only be used for improvement.
In the past month, I received so much feedback about we should, communicating more of roadmap, internals, and things that, because the developer or programmers, from a programmer perspective, you would like to understand what is going on and what is the future will be like, because you design things in particular way, so it's your design is efficient, with on top of that underlying black box, which is the language runtime and language itself in this case. So I do believe that like having work groups will increase this communication with the core team and the community members a lot, because given that they will be involved in maybe design, maybe what is coming up next, I think they will be able to receive more canonical information and can share it from there, rather than reverse engineering, debugging, trying to understand it by experience.
I think the biggest benefit that I see from this idea is having a group of people that is a buffer between the language team and the community, because obviously the language team is only going to be so big. And also, to me, obviously, they should be participating in important decisions as far as the language and the ecosystem, because they have a ton of knowledge. And they, especially the philosophy of the language, that counts a lot, and they are the experts. But having people one-off proposals and talking to different people here and there, and people change and rotate, and they don't really know where people are coming from with suggestions. I can only imagine how hard that must be for the language team to participate in this constantly revolving set of people who are approaching them. So having a group that is, of course, not a forever group, but a group that's going to stay for a while and focus on one aspect of the language and the ecosystem. And so that group having the trust of the language team and the trust of the community, it can only make it better.
Yeah, I think it's impossible to scale if you're an engineer working on the core team to, engage as much as you write code. They are already like really productive, and you cannot really ask them to like expose themselves to all these channels to gather feedback and understand what is going on. I think I would never expect anybody to, waste their time on that, because I think their time is really valuable and it needs to be canalized to the right things. And with this like buffer groups, as you said, we will give them some, knowledge and some sort of summary of what is going on, and that's what they need.
I also think the special interest groups are really cool, because a lot of times I think when people are working on their projects and they're looking at Go and saying, oh, if it could do this, or if I could have this from it, that would help my project, but they maybe don't think that it applies to the wider group, so they don't really engage. And if they knew there was a special interest group that was surrounding the topics they're already concerned with, I think that would really help draw more of the community in as well.
I totally agree. I think for really high level things or brainstorming, people see like it's just like absurd to talk to the team or explain a little bit of their ideas, because nothing is finalized. People are just seeking for some sort of community to build on their initial ideas, and the work groups will be, I think, the perfect solution to iterate on ideas, regardless of it's it's obvious or not. Or I think we need some sort of, as I said, middle channel to feel encouraged to talk.
I think it triggers ideas too, though. Like I had said, kind of the special interest groups for Kubernetes will do weekly meetings and they'll do demos. So when you take part in these, you'll see something demoed and it'll trigger your own ideas where you can contribute feedback then. And I know there's been scenarios where I've seen stuff coming down the pipeline where it was a real problem I had that I thought I had to develop something else. And it just wasn't in my thought process that it could be solved another way. And these things kind of trigger more thoughts. And not everybody's accustomed to reading kind of like the draft proposal form of things that, So they just don't participate. There's very few people who go in and read those drafts and then comment on them. Most people want to see working code. They want to see a demo. They want to have verbal discussions about it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think a demo is the only way to communicate. Just a little prototype, but nobody is going to read your proposal or written in a very formal way with no visualizations. So I do agree that meetings are awesome.
We'll call this one the first one.
Yeah, I guess so. This is the work group. This is the work group that actually thinks about the work groups and, kind of like coming with a strategy how they should work.
And now we're getting meta. We've got a work group for work
we're
group.
this meta work group.
Now, if you had your pick, I'm curious, what would be the top 1 or 2 work groups you would like to see?
That's a great question.
I think, well, I don't want to really reveal my ideas, but I think that there are things that is really obvious to me, such as, well, this is not entirely engineering related. The first one is docs group. I think without a doc, well, our current, I think, blocker is documentation and, explaining that conventions and things. And I do not really believe that the team is really caring about documentation. I think they're seeing things within their perspective. And I do believe that like a community group can totally tell them, what is more obviously missing. So that's one of the, I think maybe docs and outreach together, because community is already doing so much work in a very unstructured way, at every conferences or blogs or everywhere else. I would love to see some sort of central group so people can share knowledge with each other and create material for each other. So writing and talking and documenting things become easier.
Yeah, big +1 to that. I'm a huge fan of a docs group.
Yep.
See, every time somebody says docs, I think DOX, like publishing private information about people. We just get together and dox people.
Is it my accent?
No. Even when Corey said
thing.
it. Both ways it's pronounced the same.
Worried.
No.
It has the same, what is it called? DOC.
Phonetically.
Yeah. So I think we're actually running a little over time. Did you guys want to talk about any projects or news that are kind of out? One of the biggest ones I saw was Netflix released their new Chaos Monkey, which was really cool, and that's all written in Go now. Do you do chaos testing at all? Any of you?
No, I think I'm just going to wake up one day and go to our cloud team and tell them I enabled it and see what happens. I'm sure they'll appreciate it.
Just let them be surprised. I think it's a really fun way of testing. The first time I saw that, it's really creative. I mean, you should assume that everything dies. So
yeah, at Google we have this sort of thing once a while, and everything is just like literally off. And I'm not participating anymore, so I'm so happy. But if we have something on production, good luck.
Yeah, I do chaos testing. It's called release to production.
I don't often test my code, but when I do it in production.
Always.
The chaos is actually happening in the office, not in production. Yeah, I mean, most people don't really test that way. So it was an interesting paradigm a number of years ago when it was released. I just found it really interesting that they completely rewrote the Chaos Monkey in Go. So I think Scott Mansfield had mentioned that when he was on the show that they were working on it. So that's finally open sourced. And a related project that I actually ran into over the week was, I guess it's pronounced Pumba, I'm not sure. But it's chaos testing for Docker, which was interesting. And it has a lot of like the, kill your container and restart it and send random signals at the process and things like that. But another interesting aspect of it was it allows you to emulate network conditions where you experience packet loss coming into your container or packets being reordered or corruption and stuff like that. So I have not played with it yet, so I can't give it like this is an awesome stamp of approval, but it definitely looks interesting and I want to start playing with it.
Does it come with a pre-config for AWS network situations, so you can basically replicate what AWS is for you right away?
There's just a AWS equals true flag. Yeah, it's I'll drop the link in the channel for anybody who's listening live. But yeah, I ran across it late last week, I think, and I haven't got a chance to play with it yet, but it looked really cool. And we know 1.7.3 came out, and I think there was just a few bug fixes there. I don't know whether there was anything major there, but it's a point release, so that's to be expected. Anybody else run across any interesting projects this week?
I don't have anything this week.
I don't have any projects, but I did want to shout out to some community people. About a year ago, I moved back to the Midwest, as most of you know, and I started some meetups in Chicago and Minneapolis because the Go community just wasn't on track there. And it's been a little bit over a year, and the people that have stepped in to help me do that have really stepped up, and they've basically taken over. And again, this is all about community for me, and it's just great to have, Varun in Chicago and Eric, Jack, Nick, and Calvin in Minneapolis. And it's just fantastic to see how they've really gotten these Go groups back online and to see these communities rebooted.
And we have a meetup group, a meetup channel on Slack, don't we? Is
Yes,
it called
we do.
Meetup?
Meetup organizers, I think.
Yeah, so that's where everybody that Corey just mentioned is, including Corey. Yeah, meetup organizers.
Yeah, we have to applaud anybody who kind of helps grow the community, whether that's through code or writing tutorials and blog posts or doing conferences or anything that continues to kind of further the growth of the community. And kind of as JBD's been talking about today, the kind of collectively molding the language together, and rather than kind of just throwing stuff over the fence and hoping for the best, we start trying to find ways to collaborate and work on it together. So we typically close out the show with kind of our Free Software Friday, where we kind of give shout outs to open source projects or people that are kind of saving the day for us. I think Corey and I both have actually already spilled the beans on ours. So who I was going to think is the Kubernetes special interest groups, and kind of, to the point we've been talking about today, I think that there's a lot of value in that, and it helps everybody collectively mold the project into what they want it to be, and demos and vocal discussions about concerns related to specific areas that matter to you. I think that's extremely valuable. And then Corey, you just said yours.
Yes, I did.
Do you want to say it again?
Yeah, just a shout out, like you say, to all the organizers of local meetups. It's just such a big deal, and especially in my mind right now are the organizers of Chicago, which is Varun, and Minneapolis, which is Eric, Jack, Nick, and Calvin. They have just done a superb job of taking communities that really the Go community just kind of fizzled a little bit from a meetup standpoint, and they've got them back on track, and they are going really, really well now and have great attendance. So it's great to see those cities back online.
And then how about you, Carlicia?
I want to give a shout out to the most wondrous thing. It's the Gopher Slack bot. Flory Patan, he works on that, and it's I don't even know how to describe it. You type, you add Gopher space help, and you get a listing of all the commands you can use, and it's sweet. It'll give you a bunch of goodies. So just go ahead and do it on Gopher Slack, of course.
I'm typing it in now. /Gopher help.
At Gopher.
At
space,
Gopher.
At Gopher. Yeah, it's a user, but it's a bot.
Okay, here we go.
There we go.
It's messaging me.
Do I need to direct message it, or
you just add it in a channel and it direct messages you back?
But JBG has made a good point. You can totally do a direct message and just type things out there, so you don't have to. You won't be spamming
I think
a channel.
We just crashed it.
Well, it is open source and pull requests are accepted. This is kind of cool though. Like, just type in newbie resources and recommended channels, and that kind of makes it more accessible. Because the Gopher Slack has kind of grown so much. There's so many different channels in there, and trying to find your way around. So this is kind of cool.
Yeah, it's super cool. And of course, I don't know if we did it, but it crashed.
That's right. Speaking of crashes, I didn't get a chance to mention this. So way earlier in the show, before our first sponsor break, I actually crashed. I was gone for a while. I don't think anybody noticed. But the funny part about it was after JVG said, like, I'm supposed to be a power user. And the second she said power user, boom, I got black screen of death, like stack trace on a MacBook Pro. It was scary.
Well, that's part of my job, to expose to all those screens. So, no one else needs to go through the same thing.
I died laughing like the whole time. Like, oh man, I hope this comes up quick. But I'm looking, I have never in the whole time of owning a Mac ever had a stack trace on a screen. You say power user and boom. Priceless. So you don't have to throw anything in there, but if you have something, we'd love to hear a project you might want to give a shout out to too.
Well, I don't know. I don't want to I think highlight anything at this point. I have a couple of things to mention, but I don't really think that it's necessary.
No problem.
Yeah. I mean, what did you want to mention?
Well, it was just a couple of random ideas. I've seen so there are some co-op implementations I came across. It's just really nice to see like some of the new generation network protocols are implemented for Go, and I'm just like playing with a couple of things, just like building my co-op networks, and this protocol is like basically useful in IoT space, and it's just really interesting to see like people are investing time and trying to achieve things that we would like to achieve.
Yeah, and I think we definitely need to link out to some of your repositories too, because you've got a lot of repositories for hardware kind of interoperability with Go too.
Yeah, I think most of my repositories are private at this point.
Oh, you're holding out on us.
Yeah, I have so much stuff like in private. I was playing out with tons of like devices lately to figure out the right APIs for this, peripheral I/O protocols that I was mentioning for a while. And maybe I can like release a couple of them and share them as well while we are talking about IoT.
Okay, yeah. I mean, if you do that, we'll make sure we link any of them in the show notes when the show actually gets released.
All right.
And I lost my time because I got rebooted due to your awesomeness.
Well, this was a meeting. This was a formal meeting for the Meta, work groups. So I just want to like conclude by saying that I think people really think, and there is no intention to isolate from the actual problems the community is experiencing or anything, but trying to find the right channel it will take some experimentation, because I think the language grew really quickly and the team was really small. So I think this was kind of expected that it won't be ideal if there's a rapid growth, and it unfortunately happened. So we need to consider and options and act to make things better.
Growth is always painful, and I think we'll get through this. This is just one hurdle in the kind of evolution of the language.
Yeah.
So I think with that, somebody gave me the time in Slack. We're at like an hour and 33 minutes. So we get to have like an especially long episode this time, which is awesome. And there's so much more I want to talk about too. Like I really want to get into music and hardware, and I don't think we want to have like a 3-hour episode, which stinks. So we might have to get you back on just to talk that stuff.
We can have like, I don't know, just random, live streaming. It doesn't have to be, I think, particularly Go time or anything. It might be interesting to like brainstorm. I think what I would like to achieve with work groups is something, where you show up and talk to people on random things, not music, not my personal music, but, anything related to Go. Because talking just really, helps you to, as you said, going through like different ideas and seeing different options. And it's just really healthy and enjoyable.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing people miss when working remotely too, is that kind of interaction and triggering ideas with each other. And it humanizes people. You realize like when you're talking to somebody, the way that they come off in a draft proposal or a GitHub pull request review or something like that. Like that you perceive people one way, but when you actually get to interact with them, face to face, or at least verbally,
Yeah.
you get to kind of understand people are human.
Yeah.
So I think with that, we should close out the show.
It was really nice to be here.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for coming on. This has been a lot of fun. And I think we should figure out something for kind of some sort of like live streaming or like playing with electronics, like over YouTube or something. I think that'd be kind of fun.
It might be interesting to just like record a little bit for the Go time. Just my my vocal capabilities.
Oh my God. Yeah. So
I know I'm not promising anything, but
all right.
maybe it's a challenge for me. My personal challenge is to like record something for you.
So I challenge you right now. We have some closing notes that I'll make my way through, but I want to hear like a crazy goodbye. I don't know when we cut in for what's going to be produced, but for anybody who's listening to this that wasn't live through that, it was absolutely awesome and hilarious to hear some of the like voiceovers that JVD was doing when we first got on the call. And I'm challenging her now to end the show with a goodbye after I get through the notes. That's just really crazy. All right. So thank you everybody on the panel for being here. Thank you to Corey for stepping in for Brian while he's out.
Oh, thanks for having me. I mean, it was an honor to be here.
Thank you. So glad.
Definitely thank JVD for coming on the show and talking with us today. Huge thank you to our sponsors, Linode and Code School, for sponsoring the episode. And again, like I said, please go check them out. Show them some love. Keep us on the air. Definitely want to encourage everybody to share the show with fellow programmers. You can go to GoTime FM and subscribe. Even if you are subscribed, if you haven't seen the new website, you should go check it out. Changelog and GoTime did like a whole huge rebranding, and it's freaking awesome. Follow us on Twitter at GoTime FM. And you can ping us on github.com/GoTimeFM/ping if you want to be on the show or have questions or have ideas for content. And with that, we are ready for your goodbye.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. I just need my really low voice. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.